I thought Mortal Kombat was the most violent video game I would ever play. That was before my friends and I got a hold of Mario Paint. I'm not sure what drew me into the game, but I knew I had to have it the moment I heard about it. In the 80s, when I wasn't making flipbook animations, I had something called an Etch-a-Sketch Animator 2000, where you could animate a short story in pixel form. With Mario Paint, I was a little disappointed that you could only animate relatively few frames at a time. Still, thinking how creative I could get under these limitations, I decided to draw Link chopping with an axe, with a blood spurt as the axe landed on the final frame of whatever he was cutting. I animated him chopping random objects from a human head to a pile of cats. To make it funnier, the soundtrack I provided was a happy tune that featured cats meowing. My friends and I were rolling on the floor laughing at our masterful creation. The creativity was endless, but I shudder to think what other people animated behind closed doors. Packaged with the Super NES mouse controller, Mario Paint is an ingenious art and music program that provides gamers with a variety of brushes, pens, colors, pre-drawn backgrounds, and other tools in use for creating drawings, paintings, stamps, designs, and animations. There are 75 textures and backgrounds from which to choose, along with 120 stamps, and you can add shading and patterns with an airbrush and a fill paintbrush. Players can only save one completed work at a time, meaning many a masterpiece will bite the virtual dust. But the cartridge is nevertheless a lot of fun to toy around with. Musically, players can use pianos, horns, guitars, pig grunts, Yoshi noises, and other sounds to create original compositions, and you can add your soundtrack of sorts to your artistic works. Enterprising SNES owners can hook up their system to a stereo and save their audio creations via cassette tape, and they can record their art with a VCR. If you want to add something different to your collection, Mario Paint is definitely worth picking up, if for nothing more to say that you own a unique piece of video game history. Prior to playing UN Squadron, my experience with side-scrolling shooters was primarily Stinger for NES, with a little R-Type, Gradius, and Silver Surfer thrown in for good measure. So when I went to my cousin's house and they popped this cartridge in, you can imagine my mind was sufficiently blown. Not only was the electric guitar soundtrack every kind of invigorating, but the graphics were insane. Between the larger-than-life bosses, the crazy awesome explosion effects, and the occasional destructible environments, this was some seriously next-level stuff. Also, I can never overstate the brilliance of the way this game sidesteps the whole one-hit kill thing shooters are known for. Having a life bar that only applies if you do not get hit twice consecutively made the difficulty manageable while maintaining the tough-as-nails reputation of the genre. It is honestly as close to scrolling shooter perfection as I've ever seen. I remember playing this game so much that I actually got to the point where I considered beating it easy. That is most certainly not the case today, but you better believe I still enjoy trying. Although the box has the look of a flight simulator, UN Squadron is actually a Gradius-style side-scrolling shooter, with you taking to the skies as one of 3 different pilots: Shin Kazama, who raises his power level the quickest, Mickey Skyman, who is capable of handling the most special weapons, and Greg Gates, who recovers from battle damage the quickest. You will pilot your fighter over water, deserts, forests, and military installations, and through cloudy skies and underground areas, firing at planes, tanks, gun emplacements, helicopters, advanced aircraft, and other enemies. You must also avoid enemy fire, missiles, and other obstacles. Special items let you refill your fuel tank, destroy all enemies on screen, surround your aircraft with a shield, refill your special weapon, and increase your Vulcan cannon level. The SNES rendition has 6 controllable planes as opposed to 3, alterations to certain bosses and levels, and some different weaponry. It's known as Area 88 in Japan. When I was 11 years old, I got into a small argument with my father over what game to buy. I had 2 glaring choices in front of me. On one side was Kirby Superstar with a short pink puff and 8 games in 1 prominently displayed. On the other side, Judge Dredd stared at me from behind his sleek mask. I ended up getting Kirby Superstar, and I could tell that my dad was disappointed. Luckily, this was the start of a long road that would lead to years of enjoyment. I loved seeing that pink ball of fluff eating enemies and donning stylish hats to indicate the ability obtained from his impromptu lunch. Kirby Superstar also made it very easy to have a second player join in or leave at almost any time, thanks to Kirby being able to convert the abilities he gained into helpers. I would often have a friend over to help me get closer to reaching that 100% mark. This would continue well into my high school years, where we would challenge each other to mini-games of Megaton Punch and Samurai Kirby, just to see who would get to control Kirby. This is by far my favorite Kirby game because not only is it nostalgic, it still brings me enjoyment to this day. Cute and colorful, Kirby's Superstar contains 6 full games: Spring Breeze, Dynablade, Gourmet Race, Great Cave Offensive, Revenge of Meta Knight, and Milky Way Wishes. Plus, there's 2 minigames, Megaton Punch and Samurai King. Swallowing an enemy lets Kirby take on its ability or create a helper, which a second player can control. There are more than 20 abilities total in the game. Each ability has several different attack methods, such as dashing while attacking, increasing your attack power. There's lots of side-scrolling platform action, plus some puzzle solving, racing, fighting, and even more. This charming and versatile cartridge is well worth seeking out, especially for Nintendo loyalists. Known as Kirby's Fun Pack in Europe and Hoshi no Kirby Super Deluxe in Japan. Kirby Superstar drops in at number 23 on our list. Drop your memories in the comments, and thanks for watching. When I first got this game, I had previously been unaware that Capcom had done an SNES version of Aladdin. I was only aware of the Sega Genesis version released by Virgin Games. I was a bit hesitant when first playing because the gameplay was drastically different, but quickly my worries were met with some of the best gameplay I'd ever experienced on the SNES. Capcom hit the nail on the head with Aladdin. Some of my favorite memories of playing the game were inside the genie's lamp, escape from the Cave of Wonders on the magic carpet, and of course playing through the A Whole New World stage. Yes, I'm a hopeless romantic and a big old softie whenever I hear that song. Based on Disney's popular animated film from 1992, Aladdin puts you in the role of the title character as he journeys through 6 cartoon-like levels of play: the Marketplace, the Cave of Wonders, Escape from the Cave of Wonders, Inside the Genie's Lamp, the Pyramid, and Jafar's Palace. Like any good street urchin with a heart of gold, you're agile and can run, duck, and jump on moving platformers over lava, spikes, rolling boulders, etc. You can swing from stalactites and on chains, do somersaults, bounce, zipline, climb, and pull yourself up onto platforms. To stun the archers, knife throwers, snake charmers, dueling guards, animated skeletons, and other enemies, you can throw apples at them and jump on them. You can also use a rug to glide through the air, and in some areas you can ride a magic carpet. To help you survive the journey, you can collect bread and roasted chicken to refill your health meter, find hearts to add extra hearts to your health meter, and collect magic lamps for extra continues. Abu follows you but doesn't really do anything. The final battle is against Jafar, who turns into a cobra after you defeat his human form. Fans of the film will recognize instrumental versions of One Jump Ahead, Friend Like Me, and A Whole New World. Also released for the Game Boy Advance. Much different than the Genesis version, which equips Abu with a scimitar, and it falls at number 22 on our list. Culture Brain preaches unity between the action and RPG fan. It has its problems, but you cannot deny that these games have constantly shown that a marriage between the Arnold Schwarzenegger type gamers and the Dungeons and Dragons type players was possible then and is now. The innovation they've shown is truly awesome. Culture Brain was trying to start something. They were the first ones to create and pioneer a brand new genre, and I think if more people had known about Culture Brain games, they would have sold a little bit better. Even today, Ultimate Fighter is ahead of its time, and Capcom can learn a lesson from them in making an effective RPG action fighting blend. Street Fighter Alpha 3 was not a good example of a blend of RPG and fighting. Their World Tour mode was garbage. It was Street Fighter Alpha 3 with RPG slapped on. Ultimate Fighter took the World Tour concept and went more in depth with it. Culture Brain deserves a good hard look from every gamer and designer out there because they had the courage to do something completely different. It was such a revolutionary idea that people still haven't learned how to blend action and RPG effectively today. The secret to a good game lies in its ability to deviate itself from all the others out there. And Ultimate Fighter has done it in such a way that it makes it appealing to a broader range of people. Ultimate Fighter truly shines in the sheer number of modes that are available and difficulty levels there are. This adds a whole lot of replay value to the game, and this time they've dropped the goofy presentation for the most part. They brought back the Kung Fu Tournament mode in which you spar with an opponent one-on-one, and winning depends on timing, skill, and the knowledge of various amounts of even more complex moves. What hurt them is they had the opportunity to be the first company to add in combos other than Capcom, but the idea escaped them probably. It would have added a new dimension to the game and some replay value. The music is memorable and the graphics are improved over Super Ninja Boy, making Ultimate Fighter a solid choice at number 21 on our list. It took a lot to pull me away from Super Mario Kart when I was growing up, but after mastering all the shortcuts and game modes, the slow pace of it left me wanting more. I got Top Gear 2 for my birthday and remember curiously looking at the box in anticipation of playing it. I had rented the first game in the series, and it had sparked an interest in more realistic driving games with its pit stops to refill your gas tank and the nitros you could use as you wanted. After the party, when we were allowed some time to play, it did not take long for me to grow fond of the title. I loved the idea of faster cars, being able to upgrade your engine and tires, and even the addition of weather as a factor in racing strategy. These elements gave the game a feeling of realism for a kid too young to drive. I remember always choosing manual transmission at the options screen. I was too young to really know what I was doing, but I was able to figure it out. And I still choose that option on most games to this day when it's available. Top Gear 2 takes you on a road trip through some of the most iconic cities in the world, and the changing weather really makes a difference in the way you drive and the way your car handles. It's small details like these that make the game enjoyable. Even the comments your driver makes as he passes opponents on the track telling the other drivers to eat his dust is satisfying, especially when you are the person passing your best friend and competing to win the series. Top Gear 2 is definitely an improvement over the original while staying true to what made the game great. While it might not be the best racer on the platform, it is definitely worth picking up to burn a few hours when you're feeling nostalgic for some classic 16-bit arcade-style fun. The biggest improvement Top Gear 2 has over the original is its one-player mode, which offers a full-screen perspective, giving you a larger viewpoint of the action. Also nice is the fact that placing among the top 6 finishes in race now lets you earn money to upgrade your car's engine, tires, shocks, gearbox, and nitrous induction systems. My best friend and I had a taste of role-playing games with Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy on the NES, but the weekend we rented Final Fantasy II showed us what the future of RPGs really was. We rented it early Saturday morning and didn't sleep until the final credits rolled. Sure, part of the reason was because you just didn't want to take RPGs back to the rental place before you finished them. Who knew if your save file would still be there next weekend? But really, we just couldn't put Final Fantasy II down. The twisting tale of Cecil's redemption kept us going into the wee hours of the night. We went from the planet's surface to the underground kingdom of the dwarves, lally-ho! All the way to the moon. We finished the game at about 6 a.m., and we sat there in silence, jaws on the floor, taking in what we had just witnessed, and then we got some sleep. Final Fantasy II was my first entry in the series. I bought it after talking to my good friend Ben Williams. He was a huge fan of the first game and couldn't wait to play the sequel. When I began playing Final Fantasy II, it felt like it was way over my head. I'm not really a big fan of RPGs, and my previous experience with Dragon Warrior left me ill-prepared. Thank goodness the instruction manual came with a strategy guide to get you started, basically walking you through the first hour or two. Ben and I would take turns and use one of the 3 save slots. We would also watch the other play and offer advice like, "Don't be stupid, Fire 3 won't work." Final Fantasy II means even more to me now that Ben has passed on. It reminds me of our friendship and how much fun he was to be around. My favorite memory has to be when I was fighting the 4 fiends and they combined into one. Ben was puzzled and asked, how do we defeat the 4 elements if they combine fire, water, earth, and air? I looked through my massive list of spells and said, how about Nuke? He said, oh yeah, let's try it. And after casting Nuke a couple times, the fiend was no more and we celebrated with soda pop and potato chips. What are your memories of Final Fantasy II? Drop them in the comments. I will never forget the first time I saw Donkey Kong Country. I was at Toys R Us, most likely to look at clearance Genesis stuff, when I witnessed a crowd of children watching this amazing game on a store display screen. Rumors had predicted a new Nintendo system called Ultra 64, and judging by the appearance of this new game, I thought the console was already on display. It was obvious from what I was seeing on the screen that the Ultra 64 was vastly superior to the Genesis and Super Nintendo. Donkey Kong, followed by a little ape, were romping through what appeared to be a 3D jungle. I had never seen a video game with such a pronounced illusion of depth, including games that utilized 3D glasses. The game appeared to jump right off the screen. As the crowd began to thin out, I made my way to the front, eager to try a new system's controller. I peered over the shoulder of the boy in front of me, and he was holding a Super Nintendo controller. Inside that kiosk was a Super Nintendo system. What? I simply could not reconcile the game on the screen with the console in the kiosk. I thought maybe Nintendo had released an enhanced version of the SNES. Granted, at the time, I was not nearly as well versed on the Super Nintendo's capabilities as I am now, but to this day I cannot think of another game that out and out defied what I thought was even possible graphically on its system. I was thrilled that Nintendo was firing back on the competition without having to release a bunch of new console add-ons or a new system. It was also exciting to see Donkey Kong back in action, as the success of Mario, Zelda, and Metroid had made me feel like Nintendo's first star was forever lost in the shuffle. In more than 35 years of gaming, I must have played tens of thousands of games. Yet Donkey Kong Country is one of only a handful of titles that makes me smile just from the introduction screen alone, right up there with Pac-Man and the original Legend of Zelda. Plus, at this point in my life, I find myself relating more than ever to Cranky Kong, a true pioneer, that guy. Called Super Mario Collection in Japan, Super Mario All-Stars, which for a while was offered as a free mail-in cartridge with the purchase of an SNES console, is an enhanced compilation of 3 best-selling NES games on one 16-megabit cartridge: Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 2, and Super Mario Bros. 3. Each title features updated backgrounds, character art, and music, and the added benefit of battery-backed memory for saving. The gameplay and level design are otherwise virtually identical to the 8-bit originals. Super Mario All-Stars is also notable for including Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, a sequel to the original Super Mario Bros. That was previously unreleased in the United States, as it was deemed too difficult for American gamers. The Lost Levels, known as Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan, has the same type of gameplay as its groundbreaking predecessor, but with new, more challenging layouts, new enemies such as flying bloopers, and poisonous mushrooms that shrink or kill Mario. In 2010, Super Mario All-Stars was brought to the Wii as a Super Mario All-Stars 25th Anniversary Edition to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Super Mario Bros. It's easy to come back to Super Mario All-Stars from time to time. The original game might be a relic and the Lost Levels more of a curiosity than legitimate enjoyment, but I still get a lot of entertainment from 2 and 3. The former featured a sort of dreamlike creativity that routinely popped up in future games such as SNES's Yoshi's Island. The latter simply established itself as the mark of excellence to which all other future offerings would be compared. With these 2 games readily available on the NES and elsewhere, this compilation isn't essential, but it's still a very enjoyable one that I've had a lot of fun with over the past 30 years. Graphically and sonically, Mario All-Stars is excellent with loads of detail added to the backdrops and equal care given to the updating of all the music.
I had some high expectations going into Mega Man X2. The first acts did everything right. Excellent graphics, level design, sound effects, a lot of the soundtrack that I can still hum. There are even some hidden Easter eggs for the truly determined. While X reinvented the wheel compared to Mega Man 1 through 6 on NES, X2 doesn't break a lot of new ground. To be fair, there are some new things in Mega Man X2. Once you defeat 2 Mavericks, X-Hunters Agile and Violin come out of the shadows and you're baited into fighting them to retrieve the parts of your destroyed comrade Zero. Aside from the fact that it's a lot like Mega Man X, there are some positives. In Overdrive's Ostrich stage, you get to ride the light cycles, seen in the intro cutscene, and you can even hop on a rocket to outer space. In Wire Sponge's stage, you can actually affect the weather by attacking his crystals. Crystal Snail stage brings back the mechs. The Rising Lava and Flame Stag stage is panic-inducing, especially if you want the heart container. This is one game where I recommend looking up a FAQ and having a boss order ready to go. With Mega Man X, you could get away with doing things at random, but to avoid hours of frustration here, you need a master plan. The difficulty has been upped just enough to not let you take anything for granted, and some of the jumps are very precise. Make sure you have every item and upgrade before moving on to the final X-Hunters and Sigma. Mega Man X2 isn't overly innovative, but it is the right combination of tough and fun. Mega Man X2 took all the changes Mega Man X made and polished them with better weapons, bosses, and levels. While there are still debates happening in pockets of the internet over which of the Mega Man series is the better of the two, we can all agree that Mega Man X2 is one of the SNES's best games. And it falls in at number 16 on our list. What are your memories of Mega Man X2? Drop them in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.
Capcom struck gold when they decided to make games with Disney licenses. There were many high-quality games across several systems, but one standout title for me is The Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse. There's a fantastic level of quality in this platformer, from the detail and the colorful sprites to the catchy music in each stage. Controls are solid, but there's no way to sprint unless you're running down a slope, which can create some odd-feeling jumps. Bosses, most of which have Pete's face, are top-notch. Magical Quest is one of the more memorable SNES games I played as a kid of no more than 10 years old. My cousin and I would spend many evenings glued to the screen, desperately trying to advance. Years later, we always talked about this wonderful game as one of the best. As adults, anytime we get together, we play Magical Quest, which leads to my cousin finally finishing it after hours of attempts. That moment of triumph was unforgettable, one that I will always cherish. We both stood up in joy, jumping as we watched the credits roll, ignoring the laughter from my aunt across the room. Playing the Magical Quest was truly a magical experience back in 1992. I remember spending many a late night adventuring through the game's colorful levels, feeling that Capcom had finally made right on all the things Disney had given to Sega Genesis owners in the Castle of Illusion. It seemed like they threw in some Mega Man as well. Even as a kid, I felt that Capcom had tried to implement little touches of Mega Man into the Disney platformer, with Mickey taking on new powers with every boss he defeats, much like Mega Man does with his Buster Gun. The implementation of this outfit system gave the game a sense of depth that few platformers possessed. For me, Magical Quest did just as much for the platform genre as Final Fantasy did for the world of role-playing. Magical Quest was the title that spurred my inner Disney geek into pleading with my parents for months to buy me a Super Nintendo. Mario may have popularized the platformer, but Magical Quest perfected the art form. As someone who was an adolescent during the golden age of platformers, it now pains me to see how far a mighty genre of gaming has fallen from grace. Killer Instinct on the SNES was the first fighting game I ever truly mastered, and over time it's come to represent a sort of coming of age for me as a gamer. It was one of the last new 16-bit games I ever bought as things in the gaming scene were transitioning to full 3D graphics and more immersive experiences with Sony's PlayStation and Nintendo 64. I remember the first time I heard about Nintendo's 64-bit Project Reality, the working title what now is Nintendo 64, and how excited my friends and I were at what Nintendo was promising for the SNES's successor. Killer Instinct was among the first titles announced for the future console, initially as an arcade port that would be demonstrative of the system's proposed capabilities. With Rareware developers of the monstrously successful Donkey Kong Country titles making the game, we were sold immediately. The arcade game blew us away the first time we saw it in person, and I have no idea how much money we spent playing it. Shortly after the arcade game's release though, the Nintendo Ultra 64 release was delayed by a year. As a consolation prize, apparently Nintendo announced a 16-bit port of the Killer Instinct for SNES. I remember saving up money all summer so I could get it at release. Predictably, it wasn't nearly as pretty or as polished as the arcade, missing the full motion video sequences and incredible soundtrack. However, the fighting mechanics were solid as a rock, and it played and looked better than most other console fighting games at the time. The cartridge even came with the Killer Cut CD, featuring all the arcade game's original music. To me, this was like a small apology for the SNES's cart's overly compressed music. Killer Instinct takes place in a bleak future where a powerful corporation called Ultratech produces weapons to sell to another corporation bent on destroying one another. To test these weapons, the company provides them to combatants in a popular game show called the Killer Instinct Tournament. Said tournament is a bloody series of one-on-one Mortal Kombat 3 style fights organized into rounds consisting of 100 seconds each. Do you have what it takes? It's kinda weird to think that some of the most well-respected video games in the entire industry are not only based on a licensed property, but also about turtles that walk, talk, and kick some ass. You're not limited to simply hacking away at the Foot Clan, as you can toss them side to side and even right into the screen, thanks to a nifty scaling effect. Amazingly, no matter how crowded things get, you never have to deal with the annoying slowdown that plagues so many SNES games. Considering the amount of color being pumped out by the cart, this is an even more amazing achievement. The only major noticeable change from the arcade version is the deletion of the lava boss at the end of the prehistoric age. He's been replaced by a cool Slash, an evil version of the heroes. To make up for the loss, there's a spectacular bonus stage late in the game with some of the best Mode 7 and parallax scrolling ever seen on any console. Even the addictive soundtrack has been replicated full force, as have the voices that spout out all of the stage names. Even the most jaded gamer will find tons to love about this one. As the game begins, we find our favorite pizza-eating superheroes hanging around their sewer apartment, watching a little television. Friend and ace reporter April O'Neil is doing a live remote from the Statue of Liberty. Suddenly, a giant flying android comes screaming out of the sky and whisks April and Lady Liberty away. A collective cry of "Dude!" emits from the sewer, and the turtles spring into action. They know Shredder and Krang are behind this nefarious plot. The heroes in a half-shell begin their rescue mission in the streets of New York, and with your help, make their way to the Technodrome, which is Shredder's fortress. Using a Matrix translocation beam, Shredder then banishes the boys into a time warp. If time travel isn't your thing, you can challenge an opponent to a little one-on-one versus fighting action, Ninja Turtle style. A time trial mode's also available. Here you must fight the clock as well as the Foot Clan in 3 courses, each with up to 5 rounds. Being a huge fan of the original NES Contra, I knew I had to have Contra 3 The Alien Wars at launch. I drooled over the Japanese import screenshot shown in EGM, so by the time April 1992 came around, I already had the money set aside for it. After plugging in the cartridge, I was greeted by some great sounding music and a short intro. I recall being really impressed by the first stage. It looked better than many other SNES games at the time. Hell, even after owning a Neo Geo AES for more than a year, this game still impressed me. The use of rich, vibrant colors, huge bosses, and exuberant usage of Mode 7 was simply fantastic. Who could forget when the fighter jet comes roaring out from the background while shooting missiles toward you? While some of Konami's earlier SNES attempts saw severe slowdown, Contra ran mostly great. It was clear they had mastered the 16-bit system architecture with this one. I also enjoyed the mixture of overhead stages along with the tried-and-true side-scrolling fare. It helped give the game a nice pace as well as variety. I really liked the ability to collect and switch between 2 weapons at any time. With 2 weapons collected, you could also hold L and R together for no other reason but to look like a boss in your John Rambo pose. Almost everyone I knew would always do that at the part when the plane flies out toward you. It was mandatory in our home. Contra 3 is not as hard as many people seem to think. As with the first Contra, the more you practice, the easier it gets. It is most definitely a game where finesse and timing will get you through to the end, and as with any great Contra game, that's where you will inevitably
get to the chopper!
Contra 3 could benefit from a few more levels, and slowdown does occur from time to time. However, giant bosses, constant shooting action, intense gameplay, huge explosions, rich graphics, death-defying acrobatics, and vibrant musical score and richly detailed post-apocalypse graphics make these shortcomings easy to ignore.
Earl Green of Logbook.com recalls,
I was a latecomer to the SNES. What can I say? When the machine was introduced, I was working 16 to 18-hour days at the TV station, after which I went home and went to sleep. I was not playing or watching or listening to much of anything at the time. How late did I discover the SNES? True fact, it wasn't until I installed an SNES emulator on a jailbroken Wii. But hey, at least I was keeping it in the Nintendo family. I thought about my Mario-fixated son, then about 5 years old, how he might like to expand his horizons. He tore through Super Mario World in one New Year's Eve. I thought we would try a title with which I had no familiarity at all, Super Mario RPG. The music and graphics were mesmerizing, even all these years later, but the depth of gameplay kept us riveted enough that we tag-teamed the game all night and into the next year. Sadly, some of the concepts, enemies that literally eat you, bothered my little one with his vivid imagination, so instead of going to bed by himself, he huddled up in a blanket and snuggled next to me on the couch while I kept playing a little bit longer. And that's where his mother found us in the morning. Both snuggled up, dead to the world, finally lulled to sleep by the game's mesmerizing music. I got an earful about proper healthy bedtimes and spending too much time playing video games. It wasn't my fault that she failed to see the awe and wonder of father and son fighting their way through the corrupted Mushroom Kingdom. But to this day, neither my son nor myself finds much fun in playing Super Mario RPG alone. In many ways, Super Mario RPG is for the beginner because it offers simple control and employs many platform game experiences that most gamers are familiar with. But even in its simplicity, the game offers the most hardcore RPG players a fantastic experience that includes a humorous story and many secrets to uncover, and it falls in at number 11 on our list. The video game literati know that the SNES RPG America received as Final Fantasy III was, thanks to several Final Fantasy titles having been passed over for localization, actually Final Fantasy VI. That isn't mere pedantry because America's Final Fantasy III demonstrated the sort of polish and refinement that comes with multiple iterations of a complex concept. This is role-playing with the rough edges sanded down, yet lacking none of the intricacy and depth of its predecessors. Roman numerals at the end of a game title can often serve as a warning sign, a flashing beacon that speaks of conceptual fatigue or a dearth of fresh ideas. But this was no Mega Man 6. This was the work of its studio in its creative prime, eager to push boundaries and find new meaning for the term role-playing game. Final Fantasy III gave us more than a dozen heroes to recruit, a sweeping tale of empires and rebellions, a skill system tied intricately to the plot, and then it dared to upend the whole thing halfway through, transforming the world, scattering the protagonists, and abandoning the structured linearity of the story progression in favor of an open-ended apocalyptic sandbox. On top of all of that, Final Fantasy III featured the most impressive graphics that had ever appeared in an RPG, all set in a world that freely mixed industrial-age tech with otherworldly magic. And the music, composed by series veteran Nobuo Uematsu, was so good that the game featured an entire side story all about it. There aren't many games that take you from singing in an opera to staring down the end of the world in the space of a few hours, but Final Fantasy III did, and that was only one of many things that made it so memorable. New to the series are relics, a powerful desperation attack when you're running low on health, and the job system. And Final Fantasy III drops in at number 10 on our list. Share your memories in the comments, and thanks for watching.
Super Mario Kart co-director Hideki Kono recalls.
We did not all have the concept of a racing game with Mario. Miyamoto assigned us the task of making F-Zero for 2 players. In F-Zero, you race at over 400 kilometers per hour along incredibly long straight lines. But we realized that splitting the screen into upper and lower portions for 2 players to do the same thing was out of the question. Instead of tracks with long straight lines, the track designs are compact with lots of twists and turns so they fit well within a square. Early on, we had young men in overalls driving the karts. Back when the guys in overalls were still driving, they could throw oil cans. Then oil would spread and the karts would slide. Oil cans seemed appropriate for guys in overalls. Mario wears overalls because they're good for pixel animation, and I think that line of thought led us to choose Donkey Kong Jr. as well.
SNES Omnibus writes,
One of the most influential video games in the history of the industry, Super Mario Kart no less than invented the go-kart racing genre. Viewing the action from behind the car, players cruise one of 8 classic Nintendo characters around 15 different courses. Gamers use a variety of power-ups including invincibility, speed boosts, and higher jumps to gain the competitive advantage against 7 other cars as they race around the twisting, turning tracks. Most enjoyably, players can throw shells at other cars and shrink them with lightning bolts. The 2-player split-screen action, which includes Mario Kart GP, Match Race, and Battle Mode, is essential gaming for any SNES owner. Regardless of the mode, the controls are excellent, letting gamers accelerate, put on brakes, hop, do power slides, use items, and switch from the rearview mirror. Super Mario Kart is the 3rd best-selling SNES game of all time after Super Mario World and Donkey Kong Country, amassing nearly 9 million copies sold, and it drops in at number 9 on our list. I remember as a kid only having 3 channels to watch on TV. We had the antenna on top of the house and everything. My folks told me later this was because of content channels like HBO and MTV, which they felt were unwholesome for me and my brother's young and impressionable minds. However, my dad made sure we had supplemental entertainment with a gray video game box I came to know as the Super Nintendo. Since we didn't get the system until the mid-90s, I got to experience Super Mario World and Super Mario World 2 at the same time. While the original Super Mario World was pretty cool, it was more my brother's favorite. My jam was Yoshi's Island. Jumping, fluttering, eating everything that moved, and shooting eggs that came out of... where? I discovered Yoshi was way cooler when Mario was a baby than when adult Mario meets up with Yoshi in Super Mario World. I played Yoshi's Island almost every Saturday morning for months until my brother and I could beat the final boss with Baby Bowser. The music for that fight still gets me hyped up and ready to throw gigantic eggs. It wasn't until my adult years when I longed for the SNES I once had that I purchased the console and game to then beat it at 100% completion. The colors, the animation style, the catchy soundtrack, the acid trip from touching floating dandelion creatures, the killing monkeys with watermelon seeds, the murder of the Frog Prince by violently throwing eggs at his uvula, and the most eardrum rupturing... Those things will always be nostalgic for me and hopefully someday for my children as well. Yoshi's Island is such a unique Mario game and one of my favorites in the series. It is much different than any other Mario game at the time, and it really pushed the graphics for the Super Nintendo by using the Super FX2 microchip. I love the hand-drawn graphical look to the game. It really highlights Yoshi and the music is amazing. Yoshi's Island is one of the best sequels for the Super Nintendo. My only knock on the game is that it should have been multiplayer like other Mario platforming games, but this is a must-own game in any Super Nintendo collection. Earthbound is one of the strangest, most charming games ever made. This role-playing classic was equal parts satirical send-up and impassioned love letter to the American culture, presented through a decidedly Japanese filter. Earthbound is beloved for its unique setting, standing in stark contrast to the usual fantasy settings of role-playing games at the time. The bright and quirky take on modern-day life and the creepy sci-fi elements that are slowly introduced into the game were novel at the time, and remain one of gaming's most unique settings. Earthbound was also notable for its themes and story. On the surface, the colorful and whimsical world seemed to present a light-hearted tale of 4 children on an adventure to save the world. But dig a little deeper, and one would find a complex, and at times dark tale about abandonment, loss of innocence, and the struggles of growing up. While these themes are subtle, and are mostly delivered in a palatable, lighthearted way, their inclusion into the story and dialogue are noticeable. This made Earthbound a truly unique RPG that pushed into territory few games have covered since. The sheer weirdness of the game really made a lasting impression on me. I mean, a game where you have to do things like rescue a Blues Brother cover band from debt or get homesick to the point where it affects your battles? Sign me up. It's really a shame Earthbound didn't get the love it deserved back when it was first released, because the sheer number of unique concepts it introduced was staggering. My favorite of these was the rolling hit points counter. The simple fact that your hit points would roll off your total like an old-timey gas pump saved my bacon on many occasions. Enemies turning tail and fleeing from you because you were too strong was hilarious. There was more than one occasion I found myself yelling at the TV,
Come back here, you coward.
I recently repurchased Earthbound from my Nintendo 3DS and was glad I hadn't played it since my first run-through because it gave me a chance to rediscover all the wonderful oddities the game holds.
Say Fuzzy Pickles.
Along with the masterpiece that was Super Mario World, there was one other platformer that stood out as the quintessential: Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy's Kong Quest. Even as a kid, I could tell that this game was special. The very first level establishes something from the small note that tells of DK's plight to the shanty music to the massive ship that introduces the pirate theme. From that point on, the player is drawn into that world on a fantastical journey to save DK from King K. Rool. Unlike Super Mario World, which focused on completing the stage within a time limit, Donkey Kong Country 2 lacks a clock, with each level piecing together to make a more coherent world. The trend of introducing a new concept and building on it is prevalent in DKC2's level design as well. This makes the whole game flow as a true adventure. I had 2 different versions of this game, one on the SNES and the other on Game Boy Advance. In both versions, I got stuck on the hot air balloon level for months. I struggled to get further, instead becoming more and more familiar with the first part of the game. When I finally rode that hot air balloon to the end point, I screamed in victory. From that moment on, I was so excited that I played the game for a week straight until I finally beat it. It was a triumph that I struggle replicating even now, and one I won't soon forget. Rare has made some amazing games over the years, and Donkey Kong Country 2 on the SNES still stands up as one of its finest. This follow-up to the smash hit Donkey Kong Country features better graphics, more perilous action, platforming, and introduces Dixie Kong along with a great cast of other creatures you can play. Even the most hardened action platform players will find themselves going bananas over DKC 2. Other new features include hidden gold coins and an alternating mode where gamers compete to finish the most levels in the shortest time. DKC 2 falls in at number 6 on our list. Share your memories in the comments. Thanks for watching. As a die-hard fan of the NES Mega Man series, I had my reservations about the Blue Bomber's first foray into the 16-bit era. However, my apprehensions were quickly assuaged the first time I fired up Mega Man X on my Super Nintendo. While I had naturally anticipated the obvious leap in graphics, I was pleasantly surprised by the gameplay. It offered the perfect mix of the familiar, peppered with a number of interesting new features, such as the ability to ascend walls by jumping up them, and the speed dash. The challenge level of the boss robots was definitely stepped up as well. It was no longer simply a matter of finding the right weapon to take down any given level boss, but also adapting to their attack patterns and devising effective counterattacks. Being chased around a confined space by the lightsaber-wielding Maverick Uber boss Sigma was an all-new geek-out high for me as an early teen, and even more so once I figured out how to take him out. Throw in the engaging dystopian future storyline and the always inspiring Capcom soundtrack, and I was happily hooked for many months, locating bonus items and armor upgrades while refining my boss battling strategies. Without a doubt, Mega Man X was the title that cemented my love for the SNES. 8 years later, I was fortunate enough to relive the experience through the eyes of my younger brother Dan, as we journeyed through my SNES collection. Watching him piece together and forge his own path through the game elicited a great sense of pride, while also providing me with an even deeper appreciation of the game's timeless qualities. To this day, Dan is a huge fan of the Mega Man franchise, and that is due in no small part to the many hours we spent trading off levels playing Mega Man X. Mega Man X started off a brand new popular series and did so with quite a bang. It detached itself as being more than just a spin-off of Mega Man with its unique personality and darker themes while keeping the core gameplay of its predecessors intact. What are your memories of Mega Man X? Drop them in the comments! Super Mario World will always have a special place in my heart. My Super Nintendo was a Christmas gift from my mother. My parents were separated and I lived with my father. This was my very first console, and as a bonus, it included Super Mario World, my very first game. I spent my youth traveling between family members, and I brought my Super Nintendo everywhere with me. I became a master at setting it up and taking it down. There was no TV I couldn't hook it up to. I became the family AV expert, self-taught. My parents did not understand video games and thought they wasted my brain away, so Super Mario World was my only game for a long time. Thankfully, there was tons of game content packed into that cartridge. There wasn't anything Mario could not do, and I escaped with him. I flew with a feather, I met Yoshi, I explored haunted houses. Every challenge was thematically appropriate to the world and stage. I loved that game. I played every stage and found every secret level. It was the first game that I beat alone, and my first game that I finished to 100% completion. Having that 96 next to my top save slot was my very first video game badge of honor. Taking place in the aftermath of Super Mario Bros. 3 for the NES, Super Mario World finds Mario and Luigi vacationing in Dinosaur Land after saving Mushroom Kingdom from Bowser and the rest of the Koopas. Unfortunately, while the brothers are napping on the beach, Bowser and company kidnap Princess Toadstool and the duo must rescue her once again. They are joined by a lovable Yoshi, a friendly and now iconic dinosaur, who they find hatching out of an egg. Not only is Yoshi, who makes his first appearance in this game, eager to help, but he gives Mario a cape containing magical powers. Widely hailed as one of the greatest video games of the era, Super Mario World was the original packing game with the SNES. It's the best-selling SNES game of all time, moving more than 20 million copies, and it drops in at number 4 on our list. With Chrono Trigger, gamers enjoyed a rare treat, a collaborative effort from the teams responsible for two of the world's most popular role-playing games, Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. It's hard to imagine that kind of creative team-up with any franchises of such magnitude. Can you envision the Mario and Sonic teams trying to put something together? But whatever behind-the-scenes friction may have occurred during its creation between giants like Hironobu Sakaguchi and Yuji Horii, the end result played with silky smoothness. Chrono Trigger didn't lack for Final Fantasy's Sturm und Drang, but it tempered that grandiose melodrama with a cast of likable characters. It also managed a brilliant balancing act with its systems, presenting players with involving yet magnificently uncomplicated battle mechanics. And on top of it all, Chrono Trigger refused to overstay its welcome. Its lean quests spanned millions of years, yet could be completed in less than 24 hours. We kept playing anyway, though, thanks to the brilliant new Game Plus feature that allowed us to explore the many different permutations of alternate timelines without having to restart the quest from zero. A charming cast, an accessible system, a fun story that begged for exploration, and top-flight visuals and music, this was a rare RPG alchemy. Is it any wonder people regard Chrono Trigger as one of the greatest role-playing games of all time? When it was first released on the SNES, the game was praised by critics and fans alike, but it's not simply nostalgia that drives the hype behind this classic game. The reason Chrono Trigger remains so well regarded is that it stood the test of time. Despite all the modern advances in graphics and gameplay, Chrono Trigger maintains its quality and is just as fun today as it was when it was released. It's an RPG masterpiece, and it falls in at number 3 on our list. Drop your memories in the comments. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past was a game changer, just as much as its two predecessors were, starting with 1987's The Legend of Zelda and 1988's Zelda 2: The Adventures of Link. Whether that be the necessity of making precise maps of the dungeons of Hyrule in the first game, or coming to terms with the side-scrolling aspects of The Adventures of Link, each Zelda title has managed to successfully bring something new and magical to the table, which is why it will always be one of my favorite series. I believe nothing gaming-related will ever beat my memories of playing A Link to the Past. I was a fan of early adventure games and role-playing titles on my beloved Commodore 64, such as Ultima and The Bard's Tale. So the Zelda games hooked me hard, and thankfully they had the same effect on my grandmother, who had always been a big kid at heart. So beginning with the Atari VCS and right up until Nintendo's release of GameCube, there were countless days where we sat in the middle of the living room floor, too close to the TV, visiting places like Hyrule together. With A Link to the Past, we found ourselves contending with the expanded functions of the controller as well as the new elements of the game itself, such as the dashing attack of the Pegasus boots or the spin attack, not to mention wrapping our heads around the idea of switching between the light and dark worlds. Areas closed off and one might be open in the other. The game had delightfully devious puzzles that required a lot of note-taking and sharing of information, a must back in 1992 when the internet wasn't readily available. From my early days of adventure gaming, including the Zelda series, my grandmother sort of became the unofficial cartographer of our duo. She recorded every bit of dialogue that seemed to be of interest in a notebook, which of course also contained our detailed maps. We worked on A Link to the Past in shifts. She had her own game save that she would play when I would go home, making sure to update the notebook if she discovered something I might have missed. When I finally defeated Ganon, it truly was a family effort, which for me is one of the reasons that after 25 years, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past remains a high point of gaming.
Metroid. まだ幼虫だ。しかしこのエネルギーは人類の役に立つかもしれん。あ、ヘビーメトロイドが奪われる。
緊急試練。スペースハンターサムス・アラン。さらわれたベビーメトロイドを奪い返す。
スーパーファミコンソフト、スーパーメトロイド。とてつもない地下要塞が待ち受けている。
As the founder of Nintendo Age, I'm often asked what my favorite game of all time is, and I get the impression that people asking expect the obligatory Zelda or Mario responses. No question those are great games, but I continually come back to Super Metroid. To be sure, it's not a happy game. There are no words of encouragement from the townspeople. There are neither towns nor people, well, at least not alive. There are no goals and no hints to help you along the way, at least not in the traditional sense. In a way, Super Metroid's a long, drawn-out, cruel joke. You're thrust into a showdown with an end boss right from the get-go, followed by a near-panic attack when faced with having to escape a planet ready to explode. Maybe I'm cruel, or perhaps it's a parental prerogative, but I never tire of watching my son play the intro to Super Metroid. Seeing the sheer panic on his face when the screen tilts and the timer screams at him to hurry. It is one of the few games where I can't think of one thing that could improve it. It's a masterpiece from start to finish, save for the calluses still on my thumbs from learning how to wall jump.
As a child growing up in the early 90s, my Saturday morning ritual revolved around cartoons. It did not matter how tired I was or how inviting the outside world seemed. Saturday morning cartoons were not to be missed. Whenever the television signal to our local network grew fuzzy, my brother and I would force our bleary-eyed parents downstairs so they could adjust our TV's rabbit ears. Then Super Metroid came along, and suddenly the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles didn't seem so interesting. Super Metroid is a Swiss watch of perfect design. Every element, from its graphics to its gameplay to its music, works in harmony to tell an incredibly haunting story about a bounty hunter, Samus Aran, and her journey through an alien planet to recover the deadly organisms called Metroids. The first time I played it, the planet Zebes felt incredibly isolating and haunting, but there were secrets around nearly every corner, and I wanted to explore every nook and cranny of its serpentine world. To this day, I still consider Super Metroid my favorite game of all time, and in recent years we have seen a host of indie games such as Ori and the Blind Forest, Axiom Verge, and Guacamelee try to emulate Metroid's formula. These games are incredible in their own right, but Super Metroid stands over them like a titan. Its greatness still has not been eclipsed.
I grew up on Metroid and the NES, but by the time SNES rolled around, I was too cool for Nintendo. I became a Sega Genesis guy, thinking that games like Streets of Rage, Golden Axe, and Sonic the Hedgehog were far superior to what Mario or Link could offer. A few years into the SNES's lifespan, a game came out that stopped me cold. Super Metroid. Super Metroid? What's so super about it? Did Samus Aran now eat flowers and throw fireballs? I didn't own a Super Nintendo, but I had to have this game. I started selling Sega Genesis games, comic books, and basically anything that was not nailed down. I would walk my street with a lawnmower, knocking on people's doors. Come on, cheapskate, I need my video game system. But finally, I had enough for the SNES and a copy of Super Metroid. As I started playing the game, I found myself walking through a seemingly still laboratory. I was instantly puzzled. What the hell was this? Was the game released incomplete? Was my copy of the game defective? I entered a room to find the gigantic hulking Ridley, a creature I thought I had destroyed in the first Metroid. I started throwing everything I had at the monster. He would not die. Ridley just flew away and a countdown timer started telling me to escape. I flicked the power switch off and then on again. Screw that, I was not letting that monster get away. Through the lab again and up to Ridley, laser shot after laser shot, but no matter what I did, the beast would fly away. They made a game that starts off with a boss fight that's unwinnable. My mind was completely blown. My OCD kicked in and I tried several more times to no avail. By the time I actually started the game, I had already played for hours, finally letting go of the need to kill this unkillable creature. But to this day, whenever I start a game of Super Metroid, I try my hardest to kill that damn Ridley, still hoping that one day I can beat this amazing game in the first few minutes.
Share your memories in the comments, and thanks for watching.